PTSD is only one outcome of trauma. So we've really moved a long way over the last 5 years in really putting together the research that has come from clinical research, it's come from epidemiological research, it's come from the VA, it's come from clinical sources, really to be able to understand that a lot of the same difficulties that people who suffer from combat exposure, combat trauma, people who live in very dangerous neighborhoods who are constantly exposed to violence, people who live in homes where there's constant violence in their households, and people who've been the victim of other kinds of physical assault, sexual assault, child victimization, share common difficulties. And that really is what trauma is. It's the commonness. It's not what separates. Because when you address issues of trauma, you really are talking about some common characteristics and common symptoms, and also some common pathways to recovery, regardless of what the source of the trauma is. So that's really that's the perspective that I take. It's not just about veterans. It's not just about victims of child sexual abuse. It's not just about people who've been homeless or have experienced historical trauma. It's bigger than that. And I think there's some common understandings, and there certainly are common evidence-based practices that have been used very successfully and adapted perhaps for particular groups, but not only for that particular group. And that's really where I think we've come today, where we are today. We'll see if the technology is working up here. Now the clicker's not working, okay. So the reason, as Judge Manley said, the reason that we there we go. The reason that we are here today is to find out how to put the puzzle back together. Okay, there is a missing piece, and that missing piece, as we have said, is trauma. And in doing that, one of the goals for treatment courts, or any providers for that matter, who deal with populations that have experienced trauma, is not re-traumatizing people in the process of doing what we do. I'm an optimist. I don't think people intend in the criminal justice system, for example, to re-traumatize people in the course of their practices, but we do. And a lot of times we're just not reflecting a lot on what we might be doing that can be exacerbating the problem. So what we're going to travel along today is to talk about what trauma is, talk about what the effect of trauma is, and ultimately we're going to talk about, and that's in sort of the second half of this morning, how courts can go about changing their practices and policies, and sometimes just habits that we don't even think about, to not re-traumatize and to really start having a trauma-informed courtroom, trauma-informed practices. And it really is, for many, not a dramatic, if you're in a treatment court setting, it's not a dramatic paradigm shift. Okay, it just isn't. You know this. It's a way of thinking about now, okay, how do we put this into practice? What are we doing through our practices and our policies that maybe are re-traumatizing people who come through our treatment courts? So that's really what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about trauma, what it is. Okay. What it is, and of course there's a lot for all of you, not just participants in your courts. There's a lot of benefit to being trauma-informed. For one, it makes you safer. If you understand why someone may be reacting to a laying on of hands, for example, in a way that makes them flinch or make them almost fight back, if you understand that, you may rethink about whether that's the most prudent policy. It's not intentional, but it does make the courtroom safer. It certainly makes jails safer. It makes police work safer, to understand really that responding to someone is different than reacting to someone. Okay, response, of course, involves thought and knowledge, and that's why we talk about trauma-informed responses. I don't think I need to convince anybody here that trauma rates are very high. In fact, what we suggest, rather than trying to remember lots of facts and figures, is assume everyone coming into your courtroom, everyone coming into your program has a trauma history. Just assume that, because they probably do. If someone doesn't, great. Okay, that's great. But chances are everyone coming into your program has a trauma history, some more severe than others, but it's there nonetheless. I just want to give you a couple of types of figures here, just to put it in perspective. These are just for the state of California in 2010. I don't know if you can see these figures. There were almost 4,000 suicides in California in 2010. Now, suicide has rippling effects. Family, providers, neighbors. There were almost 500 drownings in California in 2010. Now these are, I just sort of pick out different kinds of events that we maybe don't typically think of in criminal justice as an event that would have an effect. Transportation fatalities. It doesn't surprise you that there were almost 3,200 fatal car accidents in California in 2010. Maybe you thought it was higher than that. And there were 4,500 poisoning deaths. So we could go on and talk about this. And I always put like under 18 just to see, because we often think of the accidental death of a child is even more traumatic in many respects than of people who are adults. Lots of fires, and all of these trauma events, these traumatic events, are more likely to occur multiply to people. Okay, maybe we all in here are lucky that we haven't had these kind of experiences recently, especially. But if someone has a residential fire, they're also more likely to lose a family member to homicide. So it's not singularly, and it's a very complicated issue why that is. Poverty has a lot to do with it. And poverty neighborhoods have a lot to do with it. So that's just to give you a picture of California. I'm just again, to give you a perspective here, one of the jail diversion studies that we did at PRA at the Gaines Center looked at people who were being diverted out of jail who had a mental illness and or a substance abuse disorder. And they were asked in their lifetime, had they ever been beaten, assaulted, raped? These are serious traumatic, violent events. And as you can see across their lifetime, almost all the women had been. And this actually surprised us, and maybe shame on us, almost all the men had experienced that as well. So it's, as I said, it's universal. And then we asked them in the last 12 months, had any of these same things happened to them? And as you can see, for the men, it's even higher. So it's an ongoing problem. It's not just happened in childhood or just happened before they left their particularly assaultive relationship. It's ongoing. And that's, I think, really important to know that that's the place where many people are coming from who go into treatment courts, treatment programs, diversion programs. I made reference to the study that we did that Judge Manley's court, both San Francisco and Judge Manley's mental health court were in a study that we did on mental health courts. And we asked them specifically, and again, just to give you a perspective, 70% of the women in our study were sexually assaulted before the age of 20. But also 25% of the men were. And we know that this is a very underreported event. Okay, so again, 3/4 of the women who are coming into treatment courts have been sexually assaulted before the age of 20. And then the family disruption. Half of the women lived in houses where parents threw things at one another. And some of you might know that these questions sort of track the ACE, the Adverse Childhood Events scale that's done, and actually was done in California with Kaiser Permanente and with the CDC in Atlanta. We pulled out just San Francisco and Santa Clara, and you can see here that 70% of the women in our mental health court study and 75% of the men experienced child physical abuse. Okay, these are adults, obviously, they're in the adult mental health court. Again, this is hard to talk about, by the way. This is not an easy topic. And we will get to some videos and some pictures that frankly are a little disturbing, a lot disturbing. And I just want to prepare you for that because it is a very hard topic. And I will confess, once, not this summer, the summer before, I did about 10 of these, but they were twice as long each time. I was shot by the end of the summer. I did not want to go out and talk about trauma anymore. And as I put the California statistics up here, we would do that for each community. I went to Tucson the day after Jared Loughner pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison, and the Tucson Police Department was at our training. So it's a hard topic. It's very raw and very real for people. And the other part of that, it's not just people who come into our programs who have had traumatic experiences. It's people we work with too. And putting vicarious trauma aside for a minute, I mean, just in our everyday lives, okay, just in our everyday lives, the people we work with experience trauma as well. So that's really important to keep in mind, not just of the participants, but also of the people who we work with and the people who we come into contact with, maybe indirectly work with. As I mentioned, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and I want to draw your attention to something. This document was out there. I don't know if it was put in your materials or not. It's called Trauma-Informed Drug Courts, and something we put together for this event. And on the very front page, it lists a lot of behaviors that are directly correlated with childhood experiences, such as, well, a disruptive household and child abuse, neglect, and assault. So just all of these, for example, illegal drug use, which I know is pertinent to everybody, no matter what kind of treatment court you have. Illegal drug use is 7 to 10 times higher for people who experience childhood abuse. 7 to 10 times higher. Now, for each one of those ACE, household instability and abuse, if you go up incrementally, the rate gets higher. So if you have clients who have experienced any number of these ACE items, with each one you add on, it increases their risk. It's not just one and there's a flat rate. And for every single behavior that they've looked at, we might call maladaptive behaviors, in some cases very dangerous, sometimes illegal. With each increase experience as a child, it increases their risk of illegal drug use, cigarette smoking, which although it's legal, it brings other problems with it, other health-related problems. And one of the other pieces of this is it has so much effect on health. And while that may seem like an odd topic, talking about treatment courts, when you have people who have chronic pain, they want to relieve the pain. Drugs do that very effectively. That's why they manufacture them, and that's why we take them. So it's the physical disability and pain and chronic pain brought about by experiences around trauma directly feed into drug abuse and addiction directly. So it's keeping this all in place. Like I said, there's a lot of unpleasantness and difficulty here. If you have a drug, I know all of you this is the drug court professionals. Some of you may have a co-occurring court, some of you may have an adjacent mental health court. But the reason I put this slide up here is, if you have a drug court, you have a mental health co-occurring court. Because there are only 400 mental health courts in the country, and we just counted them recently. We just counted them. And there are pushing 3,000 drug courts. So even if you believe that you are a drug court, well, you have a lot of co-occurring people in there as well. So the information, while we may talk about mental health or we may talk about co-occurring, it's in your court. Okay, it's in your court. Even if you have a parallel mental health court, you have people with co-occurring disorders in your court, which this you may have picked up if any of you were at the NADCP conference in July in DC. This document just came out. It's called 6 Steps to Improve Your Drug Court Outcomes for People with Co-occurring Disorders. This is it's a good piece of work, and so if you're just new to that, or maybe your mental health court disbanded, there have been mental health courts that have gone away because there really isn't much funding for mental health courts compared to drug courts. It's a worthy document looking at, because it really talks about a lot of what is frustrating as a drug court administrator, drug court coordinator, is people relapse a lot. That's probably one of your biggest frustrations, is the relapse. Co-occurring disorders are so prevalent among people who relapse. Okay, so hitting the mental health piece and the drug, the substance use piece is really important, and that document that came out from NADCP is worth taking home. If there are some out there, any of the materials that are out there, if you want more of them, just let me know and we can get them to you. We can ship them to you. So we have a lot of drug courts and not a lot of mental health courts in the United States. In fact, there are 8 states that have no mental health courts. Now, what do you think New Jersey is one of them. That surprised me when I found that out. What do you think the chances are their drug courts have people with mental health problems? Absolutely. So this quote from Faulkner we just include because it really highlights the essence of trauma. Okay, it really highlights the essence of trauma. It doesn't go away. Okay, it doesn't go away. California has a probably the most interesting range and heterogeneity population in the United States. If there is an ethnic group, you have it. If there's a special interest group, you have it. And you have a lot of advocates, very politically active people. That's really key to knowing how to improve the outcomes of your treatment court, is really knowing who your population is. California has, I think, the highest number of veterans, for example, in the United States live in California. And you also have the most veterans treatment courts in the country as well. You have, just an extraordinary high number of living veterans today from all the conflicts, not so much World War II anymore, but certainly from the Korean War forward. And that is, whether you have a veterans treatment court or not, you're going to have veterans coming into your court. And they pose some interesting challenges